All right. Today I'm talking about The Secret Commonwealth by Philip Pullman. That's book 2 in the Book of Dust trilogy. Um, I really don't want to make this review, quite honestly, because I don't want to have anything bad to say about this book. Philip Pullman is by far one of my favorite authors. The His Dark Materials trilogy is one of my favorite series of all time. I love his prose, I love his story, I love his philosophical concepts. I love his characters. Lyra is one of my favorite protagonists ever. Yeah, this is a hard one to do because book 1 of the Book of Dust trilogy I really liked. I wouldn't say it's as good as anything in His Dark Materials trilogy, but I was really happy to kind of just return to the world. But honestly, one of the chief complaints I had with the first book in the trilogy, La Belle Sauvage, was that while I enjoyed the protagonist, obviously I think any of us who are reading Philip Pullman, having loved His Dark Materials, we all want Lyra back. Lyra is one of my favorite protagonists. I don't know, she's just always had a special place in my heart. I thought Malcolm from La Belle Sauvage was pretty good. I enjoyed the book thoroughly, but I was knowing Philip Pullman had already said before book 2 came out that the next book was gonna take on Lyra as a kind of grown up, or at least someone college aged. So I was just like, I'm so ready to get to this. Book 1's definitely great. Really enjoyed it. Not quite as good as anything in His Dark Materials, but it's a good follow-up. I was happy with it. So when The Secret Commonwealth finally came out, obviously I rushed to the bookstore. I swiped it off the shelf. I went home and I dove in. I was so excited when I got this book. The first 200 pages, quite frankly, were glorious to me. Sure, it's not exactly what His Dark Materials was, but that's not what I expected. I knew this was a companion series. I knew this would have to be different, but I really enjoyed where he was going with it. I liked the tone. I liked a lot of the concept he seemed to be playing with. In the beginning of the book, he sets up Lyra as someone who's in college, older now, troubled, as if kind of wounds from the conclusion of His Dark Materials have started to kind of fester. And honestly, that was really working for me. I like kind of the direction that you take Lyra, especially after having completed a full trilogy, 10 years ago, where we kind of saw Lyra handle all her arcs. You have to find somewhere to go with the character. You have to find weaknesses. You have to find a new adventure. At the start of this book, Lyra is kind of at odds with her demon, Pantalaimon, and it begins with Pan witnessing a murder, and it sort of just kind of unfolds a plot that opens up a brand new territory to Pullman's world, mainly in Lyra's natural world. Lots of new space, lots of new cities, towns, etc. Different sights to see. And of course, Lyra and Pan can't resist sticking their hands right into the middle of this murder, putting them in danger and on the run pretty quickly within the book. That setup honestly had me hooked. I was ecstatic to be following one of my favorite protagonists through one of my favorite worlds again. The book sort of had a similar feel to La Belle Sauvage, and I was totally there for it. To me, Pullman's always at his best when his characters are thinking. He beautifully weaves his thoughtful themes into human interaction. Theology, political intrigue, all those things are kind of brought home through engaging debate, and the world that he creates is so alive with character. All these things are great, but after about 200 pages into the book, when things start to really settle into the story, it feels like Pullman kind of got bored, halfway through writing the book. One of my chief complaints with any book or movie, any type of story, which I understand this can be a necessary thing sometimes, especially in a series. A lot of sequels will do this, but one of the hardest things for me to read through is when the author separates the most beloved characters, the most interesting characters, the best companions for the majority of the book. Now, I was totally okay with this when this happens kind of early in the book. This is without getting into any spoilers. One of my biggest problems with this is that Pullman didn't separate the characters so that they could fulfill important plot lines. It seemed like it didn't really have a purpose. It just kind of made the story a lot more dull. It's interesting to find Lyra without Pan is kind of boring, especially the character that he's painted for Lyra in this series. I was so excited to get back into Lyra's head when I started this book, but it turns out that Lyra is frankly insufferable for the whole book. I understand if you need to put the character through the ringer in this book, but it was just not very fun to read her chapters. And without Pan, there was kind of a life that was just missing. Obviously, this book is fairly depressing. It's kind of down, it's dark, it's dingy. This isn't His Dark Materials. I get that. I'm not opposed to that, but it kind of left me feeling sort of just icky. For the most part, Lyra isn't really Lyra anymore. All the things you loved about her are gone. She's mopey, she's bleak, she's downright annoying sometimes. Most of the book follows Lyra from faceless town to faceless town. She runs into a plethora of forgettable characters. They just kind of coincidentally meet with her. They help her. They send her on her way, and they're never to be seen again. It honestly feels like each chapter contains 3 new characters that you have to familiarize yourself with, only to find them pretty much insignificant by the end of it. Most of Lyra's journey feels kind of random, led by coincidence, and never ending. Like there's not really a great sense of pace through most of the book. All the while, Lyra's frankly boring to follow. Malcolm, being the protagonist of La Belle Sauvage, the first book, is older now, but Malcolm's actual plotline is far more engaging when it's actually indulged than Lyra's is, but it's often just pushed aside. Going even further, Pantalaimmon's journey in this book is more interesting than the arcs of both Malcolm and Lyra put together, but his page time is whittled down to so few that sometimes when you return to his point of view, you kind of forget what he's even doing. You have to refamiliarize yourself with what's going on. I honestly don't want to fall into the trap of comparing this book with Pullman's claim to fame in his Dark Materials, but it's impossible to not notice that the shoes of antagonists like Mrs. Coulter or Lord Asriel are not simply too big, but also completely empty in this book. Neither of the Secret Commonwealth's villains are formidable at all. They're completely forgettable. They have small connections to the rest of the series and even his Dark Materials trilogy, but it feels kind of just shoehorned in. They're so uninteresting, but they get a good deal of page time. Like, there are multiple chapters where you're going from the point of view of both of the antagonists in this series. Sure, the motivations of these villains kind of make sense, but they're mostly just boring. They're not remotely scary. There's nothing like imposing about them, which makes it just uninteresting to read. But those aspects are not what make them fail so miserably for me. It's the fact that across the entire novel, there's no interaction whatsoever between any of our heroes and villains. Pretty much the whole novel, everyone is separated on their own little path. And if their own paths were incredibly engaging, I don't think that would be a problem for me. But it's like all the legs are too weak on their own, and they never quite build together into something of its own. We only see our villains in short bursts of chapters, clearly devised just to kind of disseminate bits of information and plot, and they never really get to take part in anything meaningful. For a 600-page book, it feels like nothing important actually happens. There are a lot of promises that get made, but they all get shrugged off into a wait for the next book type of ending. And obviously cliffhangers are fine, but there's just nothing gets answered in this book. There's no progress made. There's nothing really satisfying about anything. That when we finally get to the place that I thought we were going to reach halfway through the book is closing within the next 5 pages, and we never get to see what we've been waiting for this whole time. And there can be artistry in that. It can be a good writing technique to, leave people on that cliffhanger, but here it just doesn't work for me. And as we all know, if you've read his Dark Materials, there's a large focus on dust. And for a series titled The Book of Dust, there's so little to be found about the subject matter in either the first book, La Belle Sauvage, or this book. Basically, there are a lot of really great ideas here, and Pullman convinces you to come along for the ride early on, but the train kind of just derails and becomes lackluster in this second outing. And it starts to feel like Pullman didn't really know where to go. He had a good start. He had some ideas that he wanted to explore, some, social parallels to the real world and his world, but it really seems like he just kind of got lost along the way. That, or he was just ready for a paycheck. I have seen some criticism of people saying that he was just writing this book to return to a series that was popular so he could make a little extra cash. I choose not to believe that. I think there's a lot more to this story, and I think there's a lot more that he could have done with it. It's just the execution just isn't there. I mean, maybe he's starting to lose his touch. Maybe he's getting a little older. It's been like 10 years since the last series came out. Either way, this one just really didn't hit the mark. And it makes me so sad because this was my most anticipated book of the whole year for me. I've been waiting for this book ever since La Belle Sauvage came out. Like, I was so excited when I pulled this book off the shelves. So, there are parts in this book where I honestly wonder how an editor or a publisher let some of the things go by unchecked. It's just, most of the book is just so self-indulgent, but not in the right ways. It's kind of just leaves many seemingly basic temples of storycraft non-existent. It just meanders. Like, there's a real lack of structure throughout the whole thing. A good editor, you feel like, would have caught a lot of these things. So, Pullman is still an all-time favorite of mine and a huge influence to my own writing endeavors, but this one just really missed the mark for me. And I was so sad because, I love the name, I love the ideas, I love a lot of the philosophical concepts that he's playing with here. It just doesn't come out in a satisfying way. Like I said, the first 200 pages of the book, I was loving it. But everything after that, it was just downhill. And the saddest part about it is that I just feel like this book could have been so much more. But, oh well, I'll still be along for the ride in book 3 because I can't leave Pullman hanging like that. I've got to finish it. I got to see what happens. I'm hoping that book 3 is a little better. but this one definitely was a disappointment. So those are my thoughts. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Thank you for watching.